Okay, here is a podcast guest I've been very excited to get on. Eric Tessie from Flow Ops. Eric, welcome to the Between Breast podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jacko. Appreciate you, brother.
Um, for those that don't know, Eric, we probably connected about a year ago, and then in April 2023, so April last year when I was in Canada, we did a bit of work together. We actually recorded a course that's now available, um, and fascinating work that you do, Eric. I'm just to give people a bit of a flavour of how do you how do you get to a point with your coaching where okay, now I feel weird about telling people that I teach them how to breathe, and I think you go into nuances around the airway, around the neck, and
Mm.
around the rib
Yeah,
cage that a lot of people have yet to get to that point. I think of looking at the minutia of that and then
sure.
the seeing the benefits. Like, how was your journey to the? How do you get to that point? And just for
Yeah,
I know there are a number of people listening to this that already follow you on Instagram. Maybe they're a member with the Flow Ops crew, but there'll be a lot of people maybe that are listening to between this podcast that haven't come across you and your work. So just give them a little bit of a flavor, and then we're going to get into some detail.
of course, man. I think a lot of this started out of two reasons. Number one, the pain that I was experiencing and the dysregulation that I was experiencing within my own body got to a certain point where, everything's kind of hurting. I can feel my breathing is really restricted. I can feel the stress and it's just starting to get worse. So almost a point of desperation again, some, like injuries from the past as well, unable to, put these pieces together. So I had to start looking a little bit deeper. That's number one. And then number two, on the other flip side of that is clients that I had worked with. Like, I'd be helping people focusing more on movement than anything or alignment of the body, things like that nature. Some people are getting good results, but then other people, it's, I'm seeing in real time, like this isn't enough.
Yeah.
What's missing here? I'm trying to help this person with their alignment and how they're moving, how they're tensioning their body, but they're still in pain. Why do they keep having that issue? So I had to just keep looking deeper, man, into these deeper layer pieces, deeper layer tensioning. Um, the breathing hydraulics, not just the chemical side, but the biomechanical,
Yeah.
energetic side, and relating all that to the nervous system, man, stress response, autonomic behavioring. So it's for sure been a journey getting to this point, but it started, man, out of a state of like I got to do more to help my people, and I need to figure out my own shit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it often when people have the passion that you do and end up going down these particular areas of interest, it often comes from a place of like we've had to do this work on ourselves. And I think it's
Mhm.
interesting you say there's so many similarities I have in terms of coming up for me, coming up breathing first as a strength and conditioning coach, and then
Yes.
realizing actually there's this whole system that goes before all of this other stuff that we're not being taught. And it sounds like it was similar. Uh, what type of either training and coaching were you doing initially before you got into the sort of the breath side
Yeah.
that you do?
Yeah. Like powerlifting and bodybuilding type of hybrid. Um, really focused on like helping my clients with body composition and not causing like additional pain. But it was more like gen population. But again, like myself, like I was really focusing powerlifting, bodybuilding. I'd like be training my clients in those type of modems. So it's
Yeah,
sounds still somewhat relevant to strength training, depending on how you
yeah,
want to like break
for
this
sure.
stuff down. But that's where my passion started. And then yeah, out of a product of hey, I'm still in pain. Hey, clients aren't really 100% figuring out those issues. Led me to more functional, dynamic type movement training, things that maybe someone would say is relative to the gait pattern or like how you're supposed to absorb and release energy and motion. Um, so that was kind of how it evolved from strength to the I guess functional quote unquote movement training or dynamic movements, and we just keep going deeper until we're at the point where we're at now, and it's where we want to start from is before movement really,
Yeah,
right, which is breathing, swallowing, autonomic, just holding your body up, living with your body, not being in like a stress state unnecessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, we're no, I'm excited to get stuck into the detail of all this. And for those watching or those listening, you might want to switch at some point to watching this the podcast available on YouTube as well, because some of the some of the alignment, some of the stacking, some of the like work that Eric does on cueing for clearance of airway and neck posture and these types of things. There'll be some visual cues I think that people will find interesting for sure. So I did want to flag that up, and I wanted to give a shout out to a couple of people, the likes of Nigel Beach and Brian Mabella, who were two mutual friends and mutual coaches that we've both spoke to and worked with, and when these guys were like, you know, Eric's a legit guy. You need to look at some of the stuff that he's doing. And one of the big things for me, Eric, that I'd love you to just set the scene for us to go a bit deeper for people is that typically when we're talking about breathing mechanics, there'll be lots of breathing coaches listening to the podcast, right? We're thinking about like, okay, breathing mechanics, people go straight away, like our physiotherapists that will go straight away to like, okay, how is the rib cage moving? Are they diaphragmatic breathing? And we go down here. And I think one of the things that I found really interesting and eye opening, and also so simple to make some changes, was like going, well, what's hold on, what about what's going on up here? And okay, a lot of us go like nasal breathing, and maybe we've told tongue to the roof of the mouth, but we're often don't go much further than that. And my first question for you is, why do you think that, or what, from your perspective, from what you see,
Mhm.
before we go to this, like what's going on up, from sort of neck up, we still get a lot of misinterpretation, misunderstanding, and miscuing of
Mhm.
diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing. Where do you stand on
Yeah.
that, and why do you, what if you do,
Yeah.
what do you see with some of the, where have we gone wrong with that type of stuff?
Yeah.
Like
Great
for
point.
example, I had a professional MMA fighter last week point to literally below his belly button, because we were doing
Mhm.
some work on his lower rib cage, and he was touching. And I said, there's your diaphragm. It's going to move like this." And he was like, "What?" I can't remember if it was like a yoga teacher or Pilates instructor, but someone had told him, and he pointed below his belly button. He said, like, "Oh, I was told my diaphragm's down here."
Wow.
And exactly, that's, he won't be the only person.
That's right, man. I just think there's so much going on. And I think where people get confused is trying to limit it to one spot. So, as many people who are going to tell you, you know, you got to breathe into your diet, which is, of course, we want to utilize our diaphragm. As many people are going to tell you to do that, there's going to be other people who are going to say, whoa, man, like, don't expand your chest. Then, there's people who are going to be afraid of
Yeah,
expansion through their rib cage or their upper chest because they think that it's going to be like a reverse breathing, or they're afraid of their collarbones lifting up or their
yeah,
shoulder bones lifting up. And that's more like pathological, right? But then we get afraid of like pathological things, and then we try and zero it down into like, okay, this one thing, I just got to breathe into my diaphragm, then everything else is going to do what it needs to do. Um, we break it down. How I break it down from like a shop aspect, Jacko, is okay. It's like, okay, the pelvic floor, that's like one cavity, right? The pelvis and the pelvic floor, that's one cavity. Then you have your rib cage, that's another cavity, right? And then you have your third one, your mouth, your palate, your skull. So there's three cavities within your midline. And think of your midline as your spine, your neck, and your head. That is your body. That's where all the organs are, right? And you just got limbs coming out of it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Basically, everything is supposed to expand within your midline from like the bottom, right to your gooch, your perineum, like the bottom of your spine, all the way to the top of your skull. There's, you know, pressure dynamics happening, expansion happening within those cavities, those three different cavities, and everywhere else in between. So there's just a lot going on. And I think when we try and like limit it to just like, okay, here's just this one cue, and then now you breathe perfect, or here's this one place I want you to direct air, and then everything else is going to work itself out. I think there's just a little bit, there's a little bit more to it, bro, on top of, you know, the sweet spots of how we're aligning the bones and how we're tensioning the tissues are going to implicate the access for the air to even travel into these different pockets that we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the things I love about the work that we've done together is that we are looking at the human body, looking at it, the whole kinetic chain, looking at the functional anatomy of the entire system, respecting the complexity of it. But what I feel that we do very well, and we've done this together in that course as well, but with our own work, is as respecting the complexity of that and not being like it's going to be just this one thing, but at the same time, the way we can get people to just get something a little bit better, either stacked or in line or connected, and how very simple and easy it is to make improvements and changes with people in just a few minutes or just a few breaths, or certainly within one session. And I think that that's just one thing. That's just something I wanted to highlight to people, because we are probably going to talk in some detail about these different aspects of how the body is interacting with breathing. But at the same time, stick with us within this podcast, because we'll get into then, like, well, what does that actually then mean that you're going to do when you're doing an exercise or a particular breathing cue that you give, and you try those things and it's like, oh yeah, that feels easier, that feels better. So, and I've got some things like when I'm working with some of the athletes one on one, we measure heart rate variability in real time with a app called Hanu Health, and doing different things with their rib cage, doing different things with their breathing rates and whatnot. We get to see in real time how their nervous system. You mentioned nervous system before, like how their nervous system, how their HRV is responding when the rib cage is in a better position, when the diaphragm is functioning better, when we do some down regulation on the nervous system. And it's really cool to be able to see that. I also like the fact that I think you're the first, and possibly, I don't know if we'll have it again, person to say gooch on the on the podcast.
Oh my goodness.
So no, let's keep it technical with the gooch. But so let's go a little bit higher up then.
Yeah, man.
And where, as we go above the collarbones, let's say we go above the rib cage, we're now talking about airway, we're talking about the nose, you're talking about your tongue, you're talking about the jaw, the palate. Like, where have we, again, same sort of question of like, where have we gone wrong, or why has that been missed? What do you see in that area?
And I think if we really break that down, it starts from, I guess, like societal, cultural, like, historical influences. Why is our airway from the neck up not what it used to be, right? And we just end up as a society, we're just always looking down. We're always in this state of flexion where bones are starting to come forward. Everything's in the bottom half of the visual field. Like, life is a lot easier now, right? There's like, people don't got to work as hard, and we get stuck being less sedentary than like
Yeah,
historically we used to be. We're not getting the same kind of nutrition, food quality, soil quality, except we can go off in a certain topic, but it's
yeah.
almost not totally that, it's not that relevant. It is, but it's
What
another
I
conversation. But
yeah, sometimes people say things to me like, we might have done something, and then they go, and it's a great question. They go like, but if breathing's automatic, like, how come we're doing it so
yeah,
badly?
man.
How come my tongue isn't at the roof of my mouth now? If my tongue's supposed to be at the roof of my mouth, like, why isn't it then? If I'm supposed to nasal breathe, why do I want to mouth breathe? Like, why is that the case? And I've started to answer that question more simply, a little bit as you were going into there, of going, well, nothing, almost nothing we do in life now is natural or normal for our biology. And as much as, like, shoes aren't normal and natural, and people are like, what do you mean? Like, what? It's, well, But as in, they've only been around for whatever, in comparison of how long these things have been around. Like you say, almost everything that we do these days is not normal and natural. And therefore, it's almost to me that makes me go like, well, of course, this thing called breathing that's at the literally the heartbeat of us, it's the thing that's giving us life. Of course, that's not doing its normal, natural thing. Of course, that's a bit more upregulated. Of course, that's a bit more dysfunctional, a bit less efficient, and we have to do it more. It makes a lot of sense to me when I think about it.
Yeah.
Think
Yeah,
about
we have to have a way to explain it. I mean, obviously what's going on isn't normal, but I mean, I've always thought that we can explain like pathologies that are happening within us. And I think that's what starts it. You could say that like inattention to how we're supposed to breathe or how we're supposed to regulate our nervous system or inattention to deeper layer tissue tensioning and bone alignment that implicates the airway. Like, yeah, all that stuff affects it, but like what what really starts, the pathologies that we get, disturbed breathing, sleep apnea, like, you know, deformities with like our facial structure even too, because like we're not chewing hard enough, we're not getting enough nutrition, like the tongue suction's just it's not happening at all. There's a reason for it essentially. So, but yeah, I think we know where it starts. And just
yeah,
giving an honest answer to the audience, it's like, yeah, we're going to be doing things to improve this, but understanding like the root cause isn't you're a bad, like you're a bad breather or you're a
yeah,
bad mover. The real root cause is like modern society,
yeah,
right? And like our upbringing, like you can go into like the individual nuance of upbringing and trauma, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. I mean, I find as something as simple as if you get someone to lie on the floor so they're supported and they don't have to stabilize themselves, you bend their knees, put their feet flat, and they're lying supine on their back, and you just get them to think about and maybe count their breathing. We know that when someone counts their breathing and thinks about their breathing, they just be present and just be aware of their breathing. It naturally slows down. Like, and when they're in that supported position, it's much easier for their diaphragm to do some breathing, like, and the chest can relax. That just something as simple as that and that awareness for a lot of people makes a huge difference. And one of the things that we probably aren't very good at in a busy day-to-day life in the first world is we're not very aware of just ourself and our body and our the present moment. And I'm sure that just when we do, sometimes when we do like a breathing practice with someone, I do like my Instagram lives and stuff where, you know just stop for 10-20 minutes and just
Yeah, man.
focus, just be still and focus on your breathing goes an awful long way to
Such
helping
a
not just
long
breathing but just everything. Yeah. So
I start every single group coaching session that I do with breathing, man. Like we do cadence, we do air hunger, and then like all from supine,
yeah,
rolling into the ground, like starting to tension while breathing, cadence, light, slow. It starts with that, man. Just it's funny how people are still kind of like underlooking how important that is. And the biggest aha moment for me, man, which really blew my mind was like yeah, of course the breathing is important to keep you alive and like the chemical side and how it's implicating your blood and your nervous system, but to think that you like the way that you can breathe into your body and being able to send the air into these different pockets of your body simultaneously in like an organized, efficient, hydraulic kind of way,
yeah,
it implicates the stability of your body very much so. And I think that's one of the most like, whoa, that I think people don't really realize that the way that you breathe into your body implicates how you hold yourself up against gravity and how you can like express movement patterns. It's not
yeah,
just, for the mind or for the heart or for the
yeah,
lungs.
yeah, for sure. And look, an obvious one I always think is you take someone without, don't tell them that you're looking at their breathing, but someone goes into say a
Mhm.
plank, or someone goes in to do a some sort of plyometric, some sort of jumping. What do? They hold their breath. My S&C coach back when I played rugby, he wasn't into breathing or anything, but he was into being able to like relax and be able to, you know, not just hold global tension. Um,
Yeah.
and he would be, he's a French guy, be like, "You're not going underwater. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you taking this big gasp of air into to do this very simple drill, or you're trying to jump, like you need to relax, you need to like hold, yeah. So there is
Man, and
a
even if I could like piggyback on that,
yeah,
that's like even a sense that's like a sign in real time. Like you're like exerting yourself almost more than you need to, like contextually for what's
yeah,
happening. Why are you holding your breath in that
and it's
context?
you're doing something with your breath to create some sort of stabilization that your mind is perceiving that maybe it isn't able to stabilize unless it does this thing. Like I
Yeah,
think that goes a long way to opening people's eyes in a movement strength world, that type of movement coach, strength coach area that I sit in, where we go, just questioning and just challenging that, like, do
yeah,
I need to hold my breath there? And sometimes there's going to be benefits to holding my breath whilst I perform a certain thing.
yes,
But then I go, but how are you mechanically expanding when you then hold
yeah,
that breath? That's going to play a role. So I mean, and that's the stuff that we're
yeah.
gonna get into. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, man. It's really still fascinating for me. I've been doing this for a while. I know you've been doing this for longer than me, but like, dude, it still blows my mind how how the pieces all come together and how we can dive so deep into these contexts.
Oh yeah, but but for me, I started with a message that's still printed on my speedos, on the back of my speedos, on my budgie smugglers. It says "keep it nasal." I started with like, you know, right. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh right, you have to nasal breathe. And I'm like nasal breathing at everything, no
Mhm.
matter what. And there was times where I was, yeah, I didn't. I'm quite a gun ho type of guy, so it's like I'm running up a hill and I'm like dying, breathing awfully, but I'm not opening my mouth. And
Mm.
and as we said at the beginning, like
Yep, yep,
you
yep.
go down these rabbit holes because you're working stuff out um, for yourself. So with that being said, um, yes, breathing through the nose compared to breathing through the mouth is beneficial for a whole host of reasons that
Yeah.
people have come across. And if you've anyone's read the Oxford Answer, coming across any of that stuff, or James Nestor's work, like we see that. I think that the things that you add to this are massively important, and I'd like to
Hmm.
just delve into that. So not just nose versus mouth, like let's talk about the actual airway at the back. Let's talk about the how the position of the neck influences that. Your palate and your tongue, your face, your jaw, like in whatever order I'm leaving you as to be the expert on this to go. I want to open up that can of worms and let you order that as
Hmm.
what maybe the order of like what do you see as most important, and or where would you start with a new client? Is it neck, is it tongue, is it palette
Hmm.
work, like where do you start? And then let's
Yeah,
let's unpick a little bit of that.
yeah, yeah. It's you know what, man, like the most honest answer, and we always trying to be I am an honest person and I'm always going to give the best answer I can, but it's how that that piece isn't necessarily more important than what's neck down.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like, all right, we got like skull down things happening, and we got feet up things happening. Both of them, you know, are going to implicate different parts of the body and implicate like ultimately how we can expand through our midline and how we can expand and contract through the organs. So in terms of the neck, starting there though, neck up, at your jaw, your palate, your tongue, hugely implicating the openness of the airway. Um, Now the thing is like it's not just you don't just go and tell somebody, okay, like now you need to start mewing. You need to start suctioning your tongue into the roof of the mouth. It needs to be sticking into the palate, right? Um, because there's all these different underlying things that are going to help support that, right? It's not just one piece. Like a lot of people,
yeah,
people have horror stories actually with mewing, where like it starts to cause, so you starts to cause additional problems, right? So if you don't have the underlying, like we could say one thing, space within your palate, right? Or if you don't have the underlying alignment of your neck or the underlying connection of your rib cage and pelvis, and then you just start thinking, okay, now I'm sucking my tongue all the time, I'm doing these press ups, you're literally going to cause additional damage, just like if you were to do hard chewing on top of like a disorganized framework, right? And that's
yeah,
really anything, which is also too, we'll go just very quickly here, even with like lifting and more intense higher intense demands and trainings and intensity. It's the same thing. Like if you go and do that with a compensated framework, the lifting can cause some problems on your body and cause some. That's not the lifting's fault. That's not
Yeah.
the tongue suction's fault or the mastic gum, the hard chewing that you're doing. That's just like again foundational things that we need to make sense of. And when I talk about this, I don't mean to be like a fear. I don't want to bring that energy of like, yo, like you can't do anything until your
Yeah.
body's, like fully aligned and like
And everything's
all this
perfect.
stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be like that at all, man. But we got to respect that side of things too. And we got to know where we're working towards. I think you worded it earlier in the call. You said, man, if we can just get people like threading the needle just like 1% towards that direction where we want to take them,
Yeah.
that's all you got to do. And then you think like over the course of 6 months, a year, you've like dramatically changed somebody's life.
Yeah. 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 There's one coaching cue that you gave during the course that we created together
Mhm.
about um, alignment that I'd never heard before, and
Wrestling.
really it took a little while actually for it to make sense to me.
Mhm.
um because at first I was like, what, how's that sort of possible? But and I don't even know, I'd be interested to see what you say, whether it's necessarily possible, but it's just the intention of it. It's a bit like when I say about that cue of like breathe into your face rather than breathing up your nose. I've had someone comment like, you know you can't you can't breathe into your face. It's like, no, it's a coaching, it's an intentional cue, and it's
Yeah,
like try
man.
it and see what difference it makes. But anyway, the cue you gave was about that idea or concept of like um trying to get my palate on top of my throat
Yeah.
in terms of
Right.
stacking. So at first, when I first heard that, I was like,
Yeah.
I
You're
was
like,
like, what?
whoa,
And then
how do I even do that,
yeah,
bro?
yeah. Whereas now it's like it took me a bit to get it, and so I'm sharing. I'm being, again, being honest. I'm sharing that so that
Mhm.
when someone listening, if they're hearing that for the first time, they also might be like, "What does that mean?" But I want them to. I want you to
Yeah.
elaborate on that and
Yeah.
why
And
that helps with the sort of stacking, and what that maybe show visually
sure.
what that sort of looks like, what we're trying to achieve, and why is that important in terms of the airway.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the cues are going to be more sensory based because I'm trying to bring attention to you feeling something that you currently can't feel. So I
Mm.
can't just like, of course we're going to be giving you cues that are very straightforward, stack this on top of that, but then I also want to give you language that's going to help you um like build up the sensory perception within an area that we're trying to make sense of our body. In this case, it's the tongue, right? Or in this case, it's the stack. We're talking about like that palate being all the way over the neck. And really, again, it's trying to make sense of like how much effort it is. We say where my palate is like right here, or like how much exertion it is to really get your neck and skull to the point where like I am fully aligned here. My neck and skull is fully over my spine. And then we're starting to get close to that palate sitting over the throat, right? And again, so as like a cue, a language piece, we may not be able to get there right now. When you first hear that cue, you'd be like, I literally can't do that right now, or like that hurts if I keep trying to pull my neck back. Um, and that's okay. It's just finding a sweet spot where you can start from, and then you know where your goal is.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think the thing for people as they're listening along to this, and if some of these bits are new, is to try them as Eric is describing them. Just try to create that sensation that he's describing or cueing. Alongside that, then, so tongue on top of palate on top of the throat.
Yep.
What about then the jaw position?
Mhm.
And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, of
So I think so. Things.
course.
Yeah, jaw, neck, and strengthening of the neck. We had some questions in from Instagram about that. So we're just going to sort of slide into that
Of
area and then
course.
maybe look at the tongue after that.
Yeah. You want to start with the jaw?
Yeah,
Yeah, start with the jaw there. So what
just
we're looking
because.
for,
Yeah, so just because um, a lot of people might be used to sort of maybe cueing. They might be more thinking about like tucking the chin,
yeah, it's a huge
whereas
distinction.
yeah, there's I've got like I can move my neck, which is moving my my whole skull and my jaw part of that, but I can move my, I can move my jaw separate to the skull, and both of those two things are going to have
Yeah.
an effect on the airway, right?
Yeah. Hugely. The way I like to describe it is your skull and your neck are moving back into our stack, and really because the stack is like our skull, neck, rib cage, pelvis. You could even say like knees and ankles, 90-degree angle if you're looking at somebody in a side view, right? So
Yeah.
that's really what we're trying to do when we hit that stack. um Sorry, where, dude, I just got lost
Yeah,
off track
that's
there.
right. So the relationship um, with the jaw in that
Yes, yes,
position, probably because there's one of the exercises you put into the course that we developed together was
the jaw pressing
the
there.
jaw press,
Mhm.
where there was something you described around like that 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 neck stacking where we're trying to get the palate on top of the throat, but then the jaw is like coming to meet it, and it's like a
Yeah.
that to me again was a aha moment when I was trying to do that
Mm.
exercise. That cue of like the jaw trying to meet the skull, for me made a lot of sense, but it didn't. The first is again one of those ones where the first time I heard it, I was a bit like again, what does that? I'm not sure that I'm not sure
Yeah.
that I get that, and it was one of those like the penny dropped for me. Interesting, it was when I was going back through the course on that one in particular. I was
Oh yeah.
watching the videos
Yeah.
back, and I was like, okay, I feel like I get it now. Um,
Yeah. This describe that part for me one more time about how you're perceiving it. You're saying like the jaw
it
meets the
was
skull. How did you
Yeah,
describe it?
when I'm getting the palate on top of the throat, and then if I'm when I'm
Mhm.
doing that jaw press, maybe you can go through the jaw press and what that's
Mhm.
about. Again, because I had a question about swallowing from people, and it was like the jaw coming to meet as the skull's coming back, the jaw's coming to meet it. When we feel a lot of and again, it's going to lead us into some of the mewing exercises, like building up some of the strength through the jaw and the neck muscles to actually support that stacking and that airway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like those deep tissues in the neck muscle. We're definitely working that when we do this exercise. Everything deep within the face, and then those muscles underneath the chin, they work with the tongue suction. And essentially, you got to think like all these again tissues under the chin and the tongue. One of their most important jobs is to like get the jaw away from the throat, away from the esophagus. And again, that's like this crucial distinction or confusion that I think there is like you said, it's like, tucking the chin to bring your neck and head back. And it's really just finding a way to create that stack without your chin bracing or tucking against the effort. So it's like, yeah, you got to feel as if your neck, the back of your skull is getting heavier back. This will make more sense if you do these stacking exercises on the ground. You got
Yeah,
to feel that, but there's zero tension underneath your chin, or there's zero feeling of your chin is pulling back. So it's like your chin is essentially your mandible being your lower jaw. It doesn't have to like retract for us to bring our skull back, for us to get out of forward head posture. And again, that's the big, I think, like almost most important thing there, because you can have your neck in alignment, but if you're throwing that jawbone, your lower jawbone into your neck, it just
yeah,
recloses it. Same thing. You can suction the
yeah,
tongue up, you can nose breathe, but if that lower jaw keeps pushing in the airway, you just have another, I guess, kink in the hose, leak in the hose, right?
yeah. And I think that again, for people listening, as they're trying to piece this together for themselves, it's a case of try it and see the difference
Mhm.
between what you may have previously been doing if you took your chin, and the difference between if you try and stack that palate on top of the throat, and be aware of
Yeah.
your jaw not being pulled back in, and then maybe try and pull your jaw back in and see how
Yeah.
much the sensation of the airway being open or closed
Mhm.
feels, because you feel it immediately, and you start
Yeah.
to that starts to make us go, okay, where I put my head in space relative to my body and where my jaw is affecting my airway, and if my airway is being affected, it's affecting my breathing, and I can make my breathing easier by having it more open. I think there's some of the like super duper simple easy wins for people, but I think what is lacking, and what I really hope that people will get from, I guess, this next question or two-part question for you is like the bit that's lacking is that we don't have, but partly because they're not like sexy, we don't have exercises to build up like the postural positioning and postural strengthening around the jaw and around the neck. Now there will be some people that follow your work and
Mhm.
mewing and these types of exercises. And James Nestor's talked about like chewing really hard chewing gum for him. I remember messaging you about the same thing. So there are some people, but the vast majority of people, we're nowhere near thinking about that. Like,
No.
I often
Just kind
talk
of like
about,
forgotten pieces, right?
yeah,
Seems to be forgotten.
mate, I don't know that forgotten. I don't know that they've ever been trained. It's the same with like diaphragm strengthening. I don't see. I see athletes that I work with where they're getting really strong at everything, but then there's this other really important muscle right in the middle that doesn't get any strengthening work, and it's getting
And
left
then you watch them
behind.
breathe. You watch them breathe. They're like doing all of these movement patterns, but then
They
you
can't
watch them
breathe.
breathe. It's happening faster than you want it to be. The expansion's not there. They're not stable from the inside.
For sure. And what we end up seeing is we get very, very, very good because some of these people, they're high performing athletes, they're international athletes, so they're performing, but their performance is going to their conditioning and their breathing and recovery is going to be limited by um, the compensatory breathing pattern, but essentially got very good at compensatory breathing, but that has its limitations. And yeah, that's I sort of got all passionate then about that, didn't I? But that's
Yeah, no, I
maybe we
totally
can go
agree.
down. Yeah, we can go downstairs in a moment. I want because I
Yeah.
do what I do know is because I was exactly the same that we don't have exercises to work the neck, the jaw, and the tongue. And I think there's really a couple of really simple exercises like the mewing with the tongue and the
Yeah.
suctioning, like the jaw press. That I'd love you to just go
Yeah.
through for people because
Yeah.
it's something that people
Let's
won't
maybe
have. Yeah, because it
let's,
pieces
let's-
together all those things that we've just spoken about.
I agree, man. Um, so like one thing that's interesting too, about the tongue in relation to the jaw is that it's what's bringing the jaw forward, right? Like we can almost jut our chin or jut our lower jaw or feel like we're kind of protracting our maxilla, our upper jaw. There's a little bit of play we can do at the upper and lower forward, but like what's ultimately going to sustain that pressure, right? It's the tongue, right? It's like the deep tissues of the neck, but like yeah, more so it's really the tongue. That's the direct one. Suctioning into the palate, cradling into the palate, applying pressure into the palate. That's what holds all of that forward away from the throat. So I mean, starting with the tongue, absolutely important. One of the things that I can tell anybody here listening is if you just want to feel how much your tongue should be suctioning, and it should be suctioning unless two things are happening, like you're eating, drinking, or you're talking, your tongue should always be suctioning. Um, but what you'd want to do is open up your mouth a little bit and then try and maintain a sucking effort with your tongue. So what we want to feel like is if this is the roof of the mouth, the tongue cradles into that palate, right? And when you start separating your teeth more and more, it's going to demand you to suck your tongue up and then you good, yeah, you're seeing that nice stretch in the middle, guys. That's how you see Jacko doing. That's how we know that you're suctioning properly when you get that frenulum stretch in the middle. Yeah, good. Fuck yeah. Right. So that kind of like effort, dude, he's opening his teeth. That's a lot of effort to maintain that degree of suction. You know, Jacko has been doing his homework. But for anybody who's kind of unfamiliar with this, I want you to feel that and like retain that sucking effort for at least, 15, 20, 30 seconds to feel how much your tongue will actually fire up just to sustain that.
And
And then
you'll feel
furthermore,
tongue
yeah,
fatigue if
huh,
you haven't done this before. Your people will feel tongue fatigue. You're like, wow, and then you realize, okay, the tongue is a muscle and it can be trained. And like anything, been if it's not been used and it's been low down where it isn't being stretched and hasn't got to perform any sort of tension, then it's going
yeah,
to get weak, like any
yeah,
muscle.
like quite literally prolapsed. right?
Yeah.
And then we're talking about it as like a pressure cavity. Remember we talked about the pressure cavity of the skull and the palate as like that's one area that inflates within the midline. Yeah, it's if that tongue doesn't know what to do, and your autonomic like go-to behavior is just like I'm gonna drop my tongue and go forward, right? Then you're quite literally we can use the word like prolapse to describe that. And then we're not able to retain uh, buoyancy and stability within our own face, right? And that's just like one thing. That's just one thing. But the inner suctions of the body um, are very important. Even we can even go to like the bottom, dude. It's like the groins and the perineum kind of act, like the gooch, groins, gooch, perineum kind of act like a suction for the pelvic floor. Um, tongue acts like a suction for the skull and the palate, and then the lungs act like a suction up into the rib cage towards the collarbones by way of like the breath hydraulics. Um, so cool, man. Just every piece comes together. Every piece is like equally important.
Yeah. Um, so tongue suctioning is one thing. The other then this neck press, which I think is a fascinating one because
Yeah, yeah,
it does allow you to work on an awareness of that stacking, that palate on top of the throat. You've got then the jaw position, then you've got like the strength to hold that position, and then even you bring in as a final progression on it in the course that we've got where you add in swallowing. Um,
yeah.
so just go through
Swallow
the
against that.
go. Let's come to swallowing at the end of that
Mhm.
because then we had a question about swallowing as well, and I've got one myself.
Yeah. Again, it's since a lot of the things that we're doing, it's so we're utilizing like our hand or like feedback on the skin or an object against a muscle or again the skin or trying to, we use different tools and concepts mainly for feedback. So when we do an exercise like this, and we try and fire up the digastric, the tissues of the gullet underneath the chin that work with the tongue suction, it's just so we can feel that, right? So we have something to almost brace against, right? And then we breathe into our face with upward pressure at our fist. It's almost like we're trying to bite down against the pressure up through our fist and through our elbow as we retain suction. And all that's going to activate all these deep tissues in the neck, especially if we're in the stack. Um, and it's getting us again stronger from this stack position. It's teaching us like when we do an exercise like this, like there might be all this pressure, it might feel uncomfortable, we might be getting into like a really upright position, but we don't have to necessarily breathe faster. um,
Yeah,
and that, dude, whether it's a jaw press exercise or any exercise, that's kind of the ingredient that brings everything all together. It's man, like we're not responding to the stressors sympathetically,
yeah.
you know.
So, just for anyone that's listening and not actually, because some people will just, I know I mentioned like watching it on YouTube would be good, but some
Yeah.
people will, you might be in your car listening or on the train or something listening to this. Um, that neck press or that jaw press was you had your fist. If you showed that, yeah, if you like that fist being in underneath the chin, your tongue position, you're suctioning your tongue right, and then you're trying to stack like that palate on top of the um, on top of the throat. Um, if you maybe just in your own words, if you just describe that, if we've got a listener that is only purely just listening,
Mhm.
just in your own words, you describe that position.
Yeah, yeah, it's like biggest, simplest way, sensory feedback for the tissues that work with the tongue suction while we're driving force with our arm, um, which is again going to create this situation where all these deep tissue muscles in the neck are going to have to fire. So it's strengthening the neck and then strengthening like accessory tongue suction muscle tissues, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And then the final progression, which we talked about, was adding a swallow into that, and swallowing being and saliva production being something that's indicative of vagal tone. It's very important. So we want to make swallowing easier. It's directly related to like everything else we're trying to do. So what we're doing here is we're actually like applying force into the airway essentially. Like I've been talking about the muscles under the chin, but ultimately our fist is not just applying force up,
yeah,
but also towards the throat, right? Like back
okay,
towards the throat. So we're applying a stimulus here that if we don't flex against it and we don't
yeah,
um, breathe into our neck, breathe into our face, we're going to quite literally like have to stop the set because our airway is going to close off,
yeah,
right? So if you don't fire up all these deep tissues, you can't really accomplish what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And when you do, and if someone, when you do that, if you've got your fist or your hand in a fist underneath your jaw and
Mhm.
pushing up into your throat as well, and then you have your tongue suctioned up, and then you actually do a swallow, you feel that push forward against your fist. You feel it, and it's almost
Mhm.
like like you say, two things: that feedback of like, can you feel that happening? And there's also a activation or strengthening element to that of like,
Yeah.
have you got enough strength in your swallow? And that being an
Yeah.
indicator partly related to vagal tone, that um, to be able to make that happen against a little bit of resistance. Um,
Yeah.
what is? Do you know what that relationship is with swallowing and vagal tone? Because a lot of people will have heard of the vagus nerve and understand its relationship in
Mhm.
the autonomic nervous system, but I don't
I
personally
think
know
the,
what the
I
relationship
think
is
like
with swallowing.
the Yeah, I think like the suctioning, when we actually go and suction and we swallow and we start to make contact with the throat, sorry, with like the palate and the back of the throat there through a swallow or through like the act of suctioning, that actually like activates the vagal nerve.
Okay, so the
It's
action
like
of
it's an actual activation thing.
okay.
Um,
So a bit like humming, where when we're humming, the vibrations as it runs through the voice box, similar type of physical
yes,
and the
bro.
diaphragm sort of physical. Because I have Brian Marbella is trained with Lewis Laney from Restorative
Oh yeah.
Breathing. Have you come across Eric? And
Yep.
um, I remember him
He works with
talking
the
a lot,
cranial nerves, right?
yeah, about cranial nerve sequencing and swallowing. Again, so if someone has a weak swallow, it sounds really weird. We're talking about weird stuff now. It's like, what do you mean weak swallow? But like not being able to swallow well, not
Yeah,
after a long exhalation or a humming exhalation, not being able to swallow, and the importance of being able to find a swallow when we're doing like some extended exhale,
yeah,
humming, for example. That being all to do with that cranial sequencing and obviously the vagus nerve being one of
for
being
sure,
related
man.
in with that.
Interesting. I've come across, like, especially since I've been focusing on swallowing in particular more lately, you just realize that a lot of people have kind of like a subtle swallow restriction. You watch
Yeah,
people like, just eat stuff and talk and they swallow and it's like
yeah. Okay,
you'll
so
see
it's
that a
like
lot.
a
Like,
global compensation, like from
yeah,
the whole in the head and neck.
yeah, and like I know what that was like because like I felt that too. You know what
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean?
you
But
don't.
now
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like you notice these. I'm. What's weird? I say to people now, you like go like when someone smiles at me, like I can't now not. I'm enjoying the fact that they're smiling, but at the same time, my eyes are scanning and I'm looking at their teeth and I'm looking about their like their jawline. I'm thinking about their
yeah.
airway, and I'm either happy for them or I'm like, oh, you got a real narrow airway like me. Um, but yeah, once you notice these, well, I'm laughing now because I know that I'm going to be sat having dinner with
Yeah.
someone, and I'm going to notice. I'm going to be noticing their swallowing, all of a sudden now.
You can't help it. Can't really help it, man.
Yeah,
But the swallow seems to be something that almost everybody struggles with for whatever reason. Again, it's indicative of like vagal tone and airway space. Ultimately,
yeah,
that's like we should be swallowing. I mean, I can't give you an exact number, but from like my experience in this stuff, teaching this stuff, feeling out this stuff, like there should be autonomic, subconscious swallows happening like couple times like every minute or two, you know what I mean? But I think most people there's just like not enough saliva production. Their tongue is low, their
yeah,
mouth is super dry, the mouth breathing, right? It just becomes like paradoxical
yeah.
how
More
everything feeds
sympathetic
into everything.
causing
Eyes
that.
are
Yeah,
down because you're on your phone,
yeah,
you're in modern society, everything go right. So everything just kind of
yeah,
paradoxically feeds into everything and then yeah.
yeah. I think what I'm hearing is like, and what makes sense to me is you sort of said it right at the start. There's the sort of like mechanical side of these things and there's the nervous system side of these things, and with
Mhm.
swallowing we've got like if we're upregulated and we haven't got saliva, um that's going to play a role. And then you've got the mechanical stuff of like if the tongue can't stay up and is actually getting in the way of the airway a bit at the back, and then also our
Yeah.
positioning of our neck is compromising that space, mechanically our swallow becomes more difficult as well. And so, and then what do? We like move the whole thing to
Yeah,
make a very small, it should be a small sort of movement in there, but we move glow. And that's what happens. The body does with all sorts of things, doesn't it? It's like, if I can't do X, I have a way to, compensate for that movement. It's a bit more obvious in
yeah,
bigger movements, like someone looks like a squat or a lunge. We see those compensations. We're talking about a small movement that's ultimately, I think, with things like breathing and swallowing, these types of stuff, it's stuff on the inside. So it's
yes,
hard for people to be aware of because they can't see it
yeah,
and
straight
they
up.
can't feel it as much. And then us as coaches,
Harder
we
to cue.
can't see, yeah, hard to cue, and it's you can't see it either. So it is an interesting relationship, I think, you have when you're coaching someone in breathing compared to, say, yeah, a traditional strength training or whatever that it may be, because um, the feedback the athlete or the person is getting for themselves through the exercise and the feedback you're getting visually from them is very different to seeing someone doing trying to go for a PB on a deadlift or a squat.
Yeah,
um
completely different. And like they're both relevant too. It's like we don't have to say like one's more important than the other or one's bad
yeah,
and only one of them is good. There's different contexts and different skill sets that we build, but we start with where we start. And it just so
yeah,
happens to be from stack, from like full access, from a regulated state where we can dip into sympathetic when we need to, we can dip into fight or flight when we need to, but we generally we generally are in a parasympathetic state. We generally are. We do have good saliva production. We generally have our stack, our suctions, our deep tissue tensioning. Everything's in check for us to again just like keep ourselves alive. Because, like you said, the compensations are going to start ultimately to keep yourself alive, right? It's because like
yeah,
the airway's restricted, so everything throat goes forward,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
You could
no,
say
for
even the
sure.
same thing in like structurally too, man. Even if we're looking at like let's say someone's knee in a squat, like okay, let's say someone's gone into like pronation and valgus on like a heavy squat and like one of
Yeah,
their legs or something, right? And like okay, we want to say maybe that knee is getting a little bit of stress, but like well like shit, what's going on through like the pelvis and the ribs? Like is there like what's going on through the groins? Are
yeah,
they able to like even tension through their midline? Or if we go and
yeah,
like work on that stuff and like how the breath relates to the position and the tensioning, you might not even have to like tell that person to like cue them to get their knee out, right? You
yeah,
like
yeah,
organize that, and then that knee will get into like a more safer
yeah,
position just off that because like the underlying stuff that's gonna control how like that femur articulates is in
yeah,
check, right? So it always comes back to the breath, always, always,
yeah,
always.
yeah. I said something to my um, mentor group, or the group of coaches that I work with that have done the Oxfam certification with me, where it's similar to the type of thing you said earlier around, like, if we think about our body, like, it's
Mhm.
basically a rib cage with stuff hanging off it. It's like that's, and so
Bro, we're a sperm cell. We're a
yeah,
sperm cell that grew limbs.
and like we've got this, this rib cage with this stuff on the inside that needs to happen for us to stay alive, and I guess that's where I wanted to go next anyway, is to go, I was going to say go downstairs. We've been talking about stuff going on up
Yeah.
here, like above the rib cage or above the collarbones. Let's go down into that and being able to create pressure and be able to create stability by breathing with those correct mechanics. You talk a lot about hydraulics is a nice word that you use to describe
Yes.
what we're trying to do there, and what you were going into then was talking about how when we've got that midline stability through not having to sort of globally compensate, as I often talk about, I talk about that, like, hold your breath and just brace everything,
Yeah.
because you actually lack that deep core stabilizing subsystem, which
Yeah.
the diaphragm is part of, that force transfer or stability in the extremities, like that knee valgus in that situation. You talk about that when that knee's coming in, want it to stay
Mhm.
over the toes, whatever. That that is that's like the foundations of a house, right? And it's in the
Yeah.
center of us. Just give
Yeah.
us a little 101 of how does Eric see where the rib cage is supposed to be, the importance and
Mhm.
interplay of the rib cage, the diaphragm, and how that
Yeah.
creates that. that stability and why that's
Okay.
important.
Okay. So we've been using the word stack so much. And just one more time, like 90-degree angle of what if you're looking at somebody in a side view, you're assessing, are they at a 90-degree, are they able to create relatively a 90-degree angle at their skull, their neck, their rib cage, their pelvis, their knees, and their ankles when you're looking at someone from the side, right? So we want to work towards that stack. There's sweet spots in terms of the angles of how things are bending, the rib cage, the pelvis, how they're tilting. Um, Now, the thing to understand is we want to get to a certain spot largely because of the pathological situation that we're in, which is everybody's stuck like this,
Yeah,
right? Everybody's stuck like this, and we're all kind of trying to like get back our like height and length and like ability to get into an upright position.
yeah.
Now,
I'm sorry.
um,
When just for listeners, when when you were saying 90-degree, you're talking about relative to the floor, i.e., stacked like vertically upright.
yes,
I
bro.
just think
Yeah,
for some people they'll think 90, they'll think right angle. But
yeah.
you're
No,
talking
no,
about
good
a
point.
vertical. You're talking about a 90-degree stacking vertically up, comparable to the floor. So your body would make a 90-degree angle with the floor. The whole thing is
Yes,
stacked
my
up
man.
like straight 180. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for just explaining that a little bit more for me there. So getting to that vertical 90-degree angle, and I guess what ends up happening for most people because we're stuck like this, right? In this like more state of flexion or overly flexed, right? When our body asks us like, okay, like, all right, Eric, you're in a shitty posture, like go fix it, or like I gotta go run, or I gotta go do something where I need to be more upright. A lot of people will want to start doing that, right? And as
yeah,
soon as they do that, the rib cage itself starts going forward, right? It starts flaring like this,
yeah,
right? And then we're overly arching our back. So what it really comes down to in terms of like the spine, the middle of the body is we don't want to exaggerate extension where we're like over my lower back's curving like crazy right now, right?
yeah, yeah,
And we don't want to be in here either, right?
yeah,
There's really like and but then the interesting is like the human body can still go into like relatively more flexed, more extended. Like we have all these different options,
yeah,
but home base, right? We
yeah,
visualize home base as we're ultimately trying to get into a state of extension where we'd be if we were upright and we were walking, just standing upright. Um, and again, there's these sweet spots of how our rib cage is supposed to orient. We don't want it to be this way, that way. Same thing with the pelvis, the neck, the skull. We're trying to get into these sweet spots of alignment where we have that access and stability internally for the hydraulics to respiratory hydraulics to be able to like tension some of these deep tissues, and then to also be able to have this play through like the organs, the lungs, the diaphragm, the kidneys to be able to like pressurize up and down through the inhale and exhale while expanding, right? So expanding and contracting.
yeah,
So again, it kind of you work from that vertical stack. We know that like the human body has options to move in all these different positions. We really just don't want to be able to like exaggerate these like flexive positions, exaggerate these like extended positions to the point where like we like we lose what we're trying to, right? Can't physically make the hydraulics happen, which would be indicative of like we're like overly stretching something, we're compensating within one spot, right? Or does that make a sense?
yeah, yeah. And oh, like where I wanted to sort of go to is you've talked about the stacking and the alignment, the importance of that,
Yeah.
because that ultimately is going to put the rib cage and the diaphragm that sits within the rib cage and attached to the rib cage and the spine, puts that in a position for it to optimally move and create
Yes.
the optimal stabilization through the pressure that it's going to do. If my rib cage is offline out of that stack, there's going
Yeah.
to be some sort of compensation about it. And because the diaphragm is attached to the rib cage, if my rib cage
Mhm.
gets projected forward, my diaphragm is going to
Yeah.
go with it. So when we've got things, so like it makes a lot of sense as to why you're big on starting point being that alignment and that stacking, because that's going to
Yes, bro.
facilitate then the movement. What then what then are some of the key things you're looking for in terms of movement and things people can feel on themselves or be aware of in terms of how the rib cage is expanding and what they should be feeling around the diaphragm
Mhm.
that probably is going to, I'm assuming, is going to go beyond just feeling the belly expand.
Course. Right. And I think you're big on this cue. We'll start with maybe this one, but the lower rib expansion. You're big on that one, you
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I think that's a huge one if we're talking about the diaphragm. But there's also like front side rib cage expansion and back side rib cage expansion. So
yeah,
I guess if we're biasing like a stack that's going to be more this way, or a position that's like a little bit more flexive, we
yeah,
actually might bias a little bit more backside rib cage expansion when we like breathe into our lungs there, right?
yeah,
If I'm if I'm like a little bit more this way, where I'm gonna maybe feel I might have a little bit more feedback to get like front side lung and rib cage expansion. I guess what it comes down to is again like finding that sweet spot of the stack and these angles of the ribs and the pelvis, the tensioning and suctioning relative to that, so that like you get 360, you get like, oh shit, like my it's not just the lower ribs are laterally expanding, like the upper ribs are too. Um, all the way up here at the top,
yeah,
like my first ribs are expanding. I'm feeling like depth and space between my traps when I'm breathing in, like so it's not just the bottom of the ribs but the top, the middle, all directions. We want to be able to make all these things happen. Again, a lot of it I think has to do with like bringing awareness to the tensioning like relative to that, to the
yeah,
expansion within that area and the bone position that
yeah,
matches like with that tensioning, if that makes sense. And
yeah,
another thing too, guys, I just not to get like confused, but when we're talking about this stack again, it's like some people might be thinking, okay, Eric, so you're saying like we always have to stand like, you always have to be like that, you know what I mean? At the end of the day, there's like our we do this, we do that, right? Like, there's
yeah,
different positions that we get
yeah,
into, but
yeah,
there's still right, there's still a connection, whether you're like hinging forward or you're leaning back, right? Or if you have to like
yeah,
bias maybe a little more extension or more flexion, again, we're still working from like a connected midline,
yeah.
right? Like I still have like buoyancy within like
Oh,
my throat and my face because of the tongue suction and the deep tissue tensioning. I still have like diaphragm and kidney pressure as I'm inhaling and exhaling. My lungs are able to like expand my diaphragm, my lower, right, the pelvic floor, rib cage, pelvis is connected, whether I'm here, right? And as long as I don't like really like I can't expect to be like
yeah,
super balanced if
yeah,
I'm like
yeah,
still
yeah,
like, really exaggerating some shit like this, right? Just like I can't expect to be super balanced if like my lower back is just curving like crazy, ultimately compression, right? Like diaphragm's just gonna get stuck there. It's not gonna be able to pressurize or expand
for sure.
either.
Yeah,
Um,
mate. Honestly, for something that's made a huge difference for me since trying to work on my breathing, and then since trying to understand breathing mechanics, and then getting a better understanding, gradually a better understanding. I'm sure in another few years' time I'll have a better understanding again.
yeah, yeah,
But
man.
some of the work that we did last year together helped me. One of the biggest things that helped me with my sort of movement training is having a better, it's that word again, awareness, having a better awareness of my rib cage positioning and understanding how um, when I try and do something with my body, whether it's a hinge or whether it's a lunge or whatever the thing is, whether it's a pull up or whatever the thing is,
Yeah, yeah.
am I compensating, and where is my rib cage? And my rib cage position is part of one of the sort of our go-to compensations. So having a better awareness of where my rib cage position is and the alignment and stacking of it, or however you want to call it, but having an awareness of my rib cage and what I do with it when I'm trying to get into a particular position or do a certain thing or exert myself in a certain way has massively improved my awareness of compensation patterns. Like a classic one we have for people that so like a um really simple one is like lying on the floor and someone can be and it doesn't necessarily even matter if your legs are straight or your knees are bent, but essentially you're lying on the floor and you're aware of your rib cage position on the floor. And then you ask them to put their hands up in the air and then take your hands back overhead to see what that lat length is like. And when lat is
Yeah.
tight, what do we see? I probably in the past would have seen the lower back arching and I go, oh, you're arching your lower back. What I now see is
The
you're throwing
rib,
your rib cage forward to compensate. And yes, when your rib cage goes forward, your back arches. But
of course.
and someone could disagree with me, but for me, I am seeing. the influence of the rib cage, and when you because this is I guess this is what makes me um, trust what I'm saying and seeing is
Yeah.
that in one session, I had a swimmer, right,
Mhm.
who like an international swimmer, so high performing swimmer, like classically tight through lats because of the sport that they do to get and in the session we went and did some breathing and we did some work on her alignment of her rib cage and the movement of her rib cage. And when we then just almost out of interest for me, it was like, let's just retest what that lat length looks like. Oh, all of a sudden you're now not compensating through throwing that rib cage forward as more.
Mm.
We didn't do anything about trying to try and help the lumbar spine or anything. We just worked on breathing
Yeah,
and
and is
and
the
that
lat
made the
even like,
difference. Yeah.
yeah, and then it makes you think like, is the lat like chronically like tight for like structure, like for like because of like the way
Yeah,
this
yeah,
person moves, or is it chronically tight because of like how the rib is oriented, which is pulling at the tissue,
exactly.
or like where the rib is oriented, which affects how the shoulder blade and the shoulder joint sits, and then of course that lat is going to be like, it's going to experience some kind of stress or trauma because of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure. Um,
But that's powerful, man.
yeah, no, exactly. And I think it sort of, it definitely, for me, it sort of it proves that point or proves that fact. Just then, that probably the last bit then before I want to wrap things up by asking you. I'm gonna ask you about the diaphragm, but I'll preempt because my last question is going to be where do you see? So I'm giving you a bit of time to think about it. Where do you
Mm.
see the breathing space and breath training? Where do you, particularly in sports, like where do you see that
Mm.
going in the next 5 to 10 years? 'Cause I think it's a fascinating area it's starting to get big. But
Yes.
let's just we're talking there a lot about
Yeah,
the alignment of rib cage, the expansion of the
for
rib
sure.
cage. What about then the diaphragm? And I said it's probably going to be more than just feeling the belly expand. Talk to me about the diaphragm and probably its interplay with the pelvic floor. I
Yeah.
don't personally do. I haven't had a lot of education in the pelvic floor. We've, um, what I've seen from a couple of people that I respect as good coaches talk about if you really get the diaphragm doing its thing, the pelvic floor will come. For a lot of the time, the pelvic floor will
Yeah,
behave itself. There
definitely.
are other people that specialize in some pelvic floor work. So I've sort of just lent into that. I mean, it's an area that I probably need to do some more education in myself. But yeah, diaphragm and more than belly breathing. What's
Yeah.
that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. I think just to piggyback off what we were saying before with the lower ribs, that's like a big feeling of we're starting to fire up our diaphragm. I think like sensory wise, that's it's always a good one. It's going to be more like 360 though, right? Because to call it just like the belly, we're really just describing like front side expansion, right? But
Yeah,
as we've like said, it's a 360 thing. So we almost gotta like take that gotta like take belly breathing out of like our language almost. That's my opinion on it. Um, but the area of the belly it's gonna expand. It just happens in a 360-degree fashion. So it's like feeling your kidneys almost on the backside expanding backwards, feeling
yeah,
like obliques and lower ribs expanding like outwards, and then yeah, like your gut's gonna expand forward a little too. The problem is where your stomach is, but the problem is when it's like just the stomach and then everything else that I
yeah,
described isn't happening.
yeah, yeah,
And it's cool that you were talking about how like the pelvic floor kind of interplays with that, because I really like do think that it does. What how I would describe it is when we inhale, it's like our diaphragm and our kidneys at the kind of around where the lower ribs are, right? Diaphragm's on like front side lower ribs, kidneys are on the back side lower ribs. There's a little bit of like play down, and I'm exaggerating how much down there is, but when you
yeah,
inhale, they kind of like pressurize down, right? And then same with your guts, and then the pelvic floor balloon at the bottom of like the pelvic floor, all that like and that bro, and that's where that you want to take this conversation back. It's where that lady's not necessarily wrong that the pelvic floor actually is kind of like a diaphragm. It's not literally your diaphragm, but it's like another diaphragm, kind
yeah,
of like how we could say your tongue is another diaphragm too, within like a separate cavity. Um, but yeah, getting the pelvic floor to kind of balloon upwards against the guts and the diaphragm and kidney, and then it feels like a compressive kind of moment is happening as you're inhaling, like a compressive moment. The kind of organs meeting the balloon of the pelvic floor while the air is filling up, and it feels like you're expanding in all directions. So that's what you're looking for. What's going to help stabilize that pelvis and the diaphragm, ultimately just going back to like rib cage and pelvis dynamics, deep tissue tensioning. And like I feel like I keep going on stuff here, man, that we can really dive into, but
Yeah.
even like the groins and the inner foot are very relative to the pelvis, man. Like in the pelvic stability to like maintain that sweet spot where like you can have that pelvic bowl, have that balloon within the pelvic bowl kind of expand and feel like, whoa, I'm like breathing 360 into like my pelvis right now. My butt feels like it's
Right.
expanding sideways, my ass backwards, like the perineum's getting full down. Yeah. Yeah, so that's how I would look at it. The diaphragm, the pelvic floor is definitely relative because if you can't like create that space to get like a feeling of like stability through the pelvis, the diaphragm's almost not going to expand fully too. But then you could say that for everything, right? It's like if I
Yeah.
try and get extension, if I try and get to like an extensive state, but like where like I pull my neck back and stuff in my head, but I'm just looking down the entire time. Well, like my chin's gonna be lower. My chin's gonna start like pulling into my throat a little bit, and then now I'm starting to work like flexion, and I'm not stretching out the tissue as much as I can to be able to breathe into that or connect the dots through the midline as much as you could. So like everything
Yeah.
always affects everything anyhow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. Um, and I think that yeah, that there's so many there's so many offshoots of
Yeah.
this. I
We'll have to
think
do
that
another call, man.
yeah. We'll have to. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions from the listeners off the back of this. I've got and please do send any questions in, and we can set up another a part two for sure. Um, I just have one final question. I think we're both interested in the physical output of the body, whether that is in sports performance or whatever it is. But where do we see, where do you see the importance of breathing and breath training for sports, for athletes, and not
Yeah,
necessarily,
man.
it doesn't have to be just like in professional sport, but you know, there's a gazillion people out there, love training, running, going to the gym, or whatever it is that they do. Like I feel like we're really on the cusp of the next few years of like it's starting to be a real thing, and there'll be people like me and you going,
So,
yeah, we've been saying this for ages, and then it's the people will be like, yeah, whatever, like, yeah, I'm breathing, I don't know, like the strengthening of the diaphragm as an example of like not just being like of people actually like it being part and parcel of a strength
yeah.
training protocol. It's part of what
And it,
we do
and it's a crucial,
potentially.
and we want it to be like a crucial part of it. It's not just like a side thing. This is part of the bread and butter of like how we develop athletes moving
Do
forward.
you
I'd
see
love
it
to see
happening?
that.
Like it's a
Yeah,
we live in a
I
niche
do.
at the moment, right? Like, and yeah, where do you see that, and maybe how?
Yeah. I really do think that we'll get there. Like, dude, it's guys like you, Jacko, like other people from OA who really like made the push to make just like the chemical side, just training like the chemical side of
Yeah,
breathing and like, like the basics of what we're trying to do to our blood chemistry. Um,
but
like
I
you
still
guys do
tell
that.
you about a lot of people or coaches and things that just are still not there yet to really consider that as an important part of
Yeah.
training. It's
I think it used to be a lot more woo woo or,
yeah,
viewed as like, why would I do that? I do feel like it's changed significantly, man, just like the space. I mean, you could probably speak to that too. There's like, I'm sure you've seen there's way more people coaching breath work like now than there was probably like 5, 10 years ago.
yeah, yeah,
Wait, I mean, I know I see it. Um, but I do see this happening, man, and I think it's gonna kind of happen due to like again the amalgamation and the connection of things. It's like once people really start taking in that like breathing isn't just something that affects how you feel or how you think or how you breathe. Like that's not enough for some people. But I think some people, which is for you
yeah,
and me, that's more than enough. Keeps us
yeah,
alive,
yeah, 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 yeah,
like
yeah,
crucial fucking piece. But I think when people realize how much this implicates the stability of your physical body, I
yeah,
think that, like, as the information just keeps coming out there, like doing talks like this, bringing the information
yeah,
out there, when people really understand, man, like this affects how we move and how we physically
yeah,
function. It's not just like, all right, you're gonna feel nice,
yeah.
you're gonna be in a
Well,
meditative state. Like,
yeah,
some
interesting.
people don't understand. You're gonna be more of a unit if you learn how to breathe
Yeah,
better
yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. There was one thing that um, I think I'd posted something about. Um, I wonder. It was almost like a wondering of like I do loads of breath holding in just my normal resistance training work. I don't do loads of like heavy like max strength stuff. I do lots of stuff within sort of 20,
Like more
10 to
like sub
20
maximal.
rep range stuff. Yeah, I'm doing like endurance training in this thing. But I like my strength training, but it's just a little bit
Well,
more
you're
endurance.
going off on the endurance training too. So like you're like indirectly like working your CO2 while you're doing that also.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like I have maintained a level of muscle mass that I felt a bit like because sometimes if I'm doing an ultra, I don't do that many of them a year, but like if I'm doing an ultra, there's a part of you, you might be like 16 hours in going, why the hell was I doing pull-ups before? Like I don't need like, right now I want a lighter upper body and like, but anyway, so,
Yeah.
but I,
Yeah.
for the amount of endurance stuff that I've done over the last 2 years, I was feeling like the muscle mass that I was maintaining was a bit. I was a bit like I was a bit surprised. Like I thought maybe I wouldn't hold that. I mean, and I wondered. Oh well, I do a lot of my breath holding as
You thought
part of
you'd,
this
bro, like you're
training.
saying you thought you'd be small. You thought you'd maybe be like a little
Yeah,
bit smaller
yeah.
physically.
And
Huh.
I looked at. I was like,
Bro,
oh well, I
you look
wonder.
like you're super muscular, Jacko. You look awesome, man.
Yeah, but I was like, I'm doing breath holding with my resistance training. I was like, I wonder how much that plays into hypertrophy response. And then
Mm.
someone messaged me on Insta. They were like sent a paper, like a research paper, and so I had a quick just to type in hypoxia or hypoxic training and hypertrophy. And it turns out there's absolutely a gazillion loads of research been done and very conclusive that
Wow.
if you do hypoxic work with resistance training, you increase the hypertrophy response. Um, the
Wow.
the link that's missing is that the hypoxic training will be done with like hypoxic masks or manipulating the percentage of oxygen in the air people are breathing in a laboratory setting. They're not creating their hypoxia through breath holding, but we know that we create hypoxia and we can measure that we create hypoxia through breath holding. So,
Yeah.
I'm saying this. Sorry, it's a
Interesting.
long story towards the reason I'm
No, no,
saying
it's
it.
a great story.
But the reason I was saying it was because I put a post on about a picture of me like trying to look jacked or being basically being surprised that I was looking quite jacked, and I was like, oh, hypertrophy and breath holding, and it was like 450 comments of people like what, because I was like, if you're interested, it was like just well you see your response here was
Yeah.
just, but it was like okay, maybe for some people that's the starting point for them of
Yeah, man.
taking breathing seriously as a thing that will change the way that
For
they
real.
perform, but then where that may go and take with them. But it highlighted to me when you were saying like, for some people feeling better, breathing better is not enough. They want to like do this better or be jacked or whatever. And it's like, well,
Yeah, yeah.
actually, it can do that as well,
Shit.
potentially.
Man, I didn't know that. I'd love to hear that.
May I like you have to just have a search Google
Yeah.
Scholar. Just go hypoxia and hypertrophy. It's like it's
There's a load
pretty
of
it's
load of
pretty legit.
studies, eh?
Yeah, but
Fuck
not
yeah. That's
we
super cool.
yeah, breath holding to create the to create the hypoxia. We know
Mm.
that has been studied, but not then directly the effect on hypertrophy from breath holding. But you're going to take. I'm basically taking two things and linking them together. One day someone
Yeah.
will study
So I
it.
guess in those tests they weren't like testing people for like they weren't giving people a hypertrophy program. They just like were able to notice that there were
No, yeah,
hypertrophy
yeah, no,
benefits from.
they were making them doing like a hypertrophy based
Mhm.
like 10, I can't remember all of the protocols, but sort of a 10 to 12 rep range or something of multiple sets over a series of weeks. But they had one group breathing air that was lower in oxygen so that they were becoming hypoxic
Oh,
whilst they were
yeah,
doing their
yeah.
training. Whereas what I'm and comparing that to a group that did the same training but didn't breathe um, air that had a lower percentage of oxygen and therefore obviously weren't getting hypoxic and comparing the results. What I'm saying with the breath holding is we know and we can measure our blood oxygen saturation, like in a session when I'm doing breath holding, I get
Yeah.
hypoxic. Hypoxia is anything under 91%. I comfortably get hypoxic during a session by doing some breath holding with my strength training. Um, and that's maybe that's a set. I'm going to record a separate podcast diving into it actually. So
Good, man. I think that, but yeah, I mean, I didn't even know. That's interesting. I've never heard of that before, but like it makes sense. You know what I mean? It makes sense, obviously, if you have a higher CO2, like that's gonna be more oxygen in your blood.
yeah, and
Right.
the,
So like what do you mean about oxygen delivery to like the working tissues?
yeah,
Shit.
and depending on the order that these podcasts go out on, that podcast might have already been out. So people might already be like, "Oh yeah, I did listen to that one." Or if you haven't listened to it, either it's already out or it isn't out yet and it's coming. um, Eric, absolutely always love talking with you, learning
Hey
from
man.
you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. How can people follow your work, get to work with you a little bit more? What are your socials?
Yeah.
Just give us those links.
Hey, everybody, you can check me out at underscore flowops on Instagram. Follow me, send me a message. Let's get to talking and see what's going on with your situation. We also have our membership group where we get very deep work in group coaching, a platform full of all the education that you're going to need, the programming, all the deep dive stuff. But of course, getting the work in with us as a group, you'll be able to get a discount off that when you join through Pro Breathwork through Jacko. So that's
Yep.
something I want you guys to look out for when we do drop the course. But outside of that, I just wanted to say this to everybody listening here because I didn't want to forget it. But um, just going back to shop guys, last point here, when we're talking about that tongue suction, it's really going to be that middle and back portion of the tongue that's going to get those paranasal cavities to open up. The tip of the tongue, a lot of people will talk about the tip and how we want it to be just behind the back of the front teeth. That's very important. That's like part of it. We want the whole tongue to be cradling nicely into the palate, but it's the middle and the back.
Yeah, it's like the
Breathe in
tip of
the
the tongue's
back,
the
you know.
tip of the tongue's the easy bit, right?
Right? That's it is by far the easiest part. I think that was like one of the first things you said to me. You're like, man, I've heard about that before, but it wasn't the middle and the back action that you were able to make sense of. So like
Yeah.
that's going to be the muscular effort part of it. And just remember that even like as we're talking about this right now, feel that out, create that sucking effort, breathe into that. It's like, man, that if I don't have enough of a suck through the backside, you don't get as clean as open of a breath in. So just wanted to make sure that was abundantly clear for everybody.
Yeah. Awesome, Eric. Thank you. It's one of the things I love about you, the detail of your work and um, how much you clearly, and that makes this point really clear, how much you care about the information that you're giving and that the people are listening. You could see basically in your head, you would like going, I got to make this, I need to, I want to make this point before we go off. I want to make this point so that people know. And it's, yeah, it's a credit to your testament of what you are like as a coach and what you're like as a human. So, yeah, big respect to
Jacko,
you.
man, bro, thank you for giving me this platform and this moment to have this conversation with you to talk about some of my work. And bro, like let's do another one of these calls, man. I think there's a lot more stuff we could tap into, and
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun today.
For sure. And for people, if you want to go and follow and check at underscore flow ups on Insta, and you speak directly with Eric in the DMs there. But also, if you want to, we mentioned a couple of times we recorded a course together, and that is on probreathwork.com now. There is an introductory offer on it as well, and that is me and Eric going through together. And at the end of that course, if you want to go and take a deeper dive and join the Flow Ops membership, Eric has kindly gave a 15% discount code within there. So that is within the course if you want to go and take a bit of a deeper deep dive. Links to Eric's socials, the new course with Eric and me on probreathwork.com will all be in the show notes. So Eric, thank you so much for the work that we've done together when we met, and your hospitality when I was in Canada last year, and then for your time today on the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Man, you're so welcome. Let's keep in touch, Jacko.
Cheers, man.